Alrighty, David Staples here from the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Danielle Smith of the UCP, who is running to be Premier. She's agreed to sit down for some interview questions. I'm hoping to do the same process with Rachel Notley. So, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Nice to talk to you, David.
Good to talk to you. All right, let's start off with something I've been thinking about a lot, which is how to persuade other Canadians to get on board with Alberta's agenda for abundant energy and cheap and affordable energy. So Peter Lougheed, who was voted by other Canadians as the greatest premier in Canadian history, argued that for a strong and united Canada, Canadians need a strong Alberta. So how will you reach out to other Canadians to convince them that a strong Alberta, free to go its own path on energy issues, is the best for everyone in this country?
I'm very inspired by Peter Lougheed's vision. One of the things that we knew about Peter Lougheed is he was compassionate, he cared, he balanced budgets, and he was tough with Ottawa. He made it very clear to everybody that Albertans own the resources. And I think that over the last number of years, Ottawa's forgotten that message. And so part of the reason why I knew we had to draw a clear, bright line in the sand is that they have kept on encroaching in our area of jurisdiction. They essentially canceled pipelines. They brought through legislation, Bill C-69, that makes it difficult for us to, almost impossible for us to build new projects. They put a tanker ban on the West Coast. We lost Energy East. We lost Northern Gateway. We lost Keystone XL. We saw very little advocacy on the part of the federal government for any of those things. Now they want to hammer us even more. We tried to get rid of the carbon tax that Rachel Notley brought in, and then they wouldn't let us. They're now talking about an emissions cap, an idea they got from her. They're talking about a net zero electricity grid, which the Alberta Electric System Operator says will cost $50 billion and increase people's power bills by 40%. And they're also talking about a cap on emissions, which we know is essentially a production cap. So that's the environment that we find ourselves in and why we have to push back so hard. One of the things that I did just before the election writ drop was to create our own emissions reduction strategy. I noticed that Scott Moe is doing the same thing, where we're looking forward to 2050 to get to carbon neutrality, which is what we've committed to internationally, but we have to do it in a way that makes sense for Alberta's economy. I think that we will bring people on board on our side when they know that we are not offside with their aspirations to get there, to dramatically reduce emissions. But we need to make it very clear. We will not be shutting down our oil and natural gas industry. We will not be shutting in production. The rest of the country benefits when Alberta's doing well, because then we're able to not only do well here financially, but we're also able to generate tax revenues that benefit the rest of the country.
So energy and public policy experts agree that to decarbonize the Alberta grid by 2035, it will create tens of billions in extra cost. It's kind of different people have different estimates on how much it's going to be, but it's tens of billions of dollars. And the independent Alberta grid operator says it will drive up power bills by 40%. So the Trudeau Liberals and Notley's NDP support this 2035 plan due to climate change concerns. Why do you oppose it? And what benefit comes from pushing the deadline back 15 years to 2050? Why would we do that?
Well, I can tell you part of what happened is the phase out of coal that happened prematurely stranded a lot of assets. I'm told by some industry individuals that it cost $4 billion to do that early phase out of coal. And part of the way we were able to get dramatic reductions was to switch to natural gas. That was accepted at the time, but now the goalposts have moved again. And now they want us to have 100% of our natural gas on our grid, which is about 10,000 megawatts of power, carbon neutral by 2035. That's the reason why it's so expensive. This is, we also know, just based on what we saw over the last winter, that wind and solar are simply just not reliable. When we need it the most in the dead of winter, the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And so we know that wind and solar is not going to be the solution. I do believe that small modular nuclear is going to be able to help us out, but the first small modular nuclear aren't going to be rolled out in this country until probably around 2028. So that means that we need more time in order to be able to bring that new type of electricity development on stream. If you don't do that, if you don't allow for a long enough time horizon for technology and investment and sort of the natural the natural turnover of capital to take place, what happens is consumers end up taking it in the ear. So that's what I want to avoid. Is we already saw what happened as a result of the NDP policies. It's been growing over the last number of years. The electricity crisis, the overbuild of transmission and distribution that has driven up the cost of our power bills, and now, of course, the rising cost of everything because we haven't gotten additional new projects on stream in time. The increase in gas prices is also driving things up. So these things are impacting the power bills. And when people look back on this past winter and say, can I afford to have my power bills increase another 40%? Ask any small business owner the kind of impact that's going to have after this past winter, to see their bills go up another 40%. And it's avoidable. We can reach the target of 2050. We can do it with good technology, and we can do it smart in a way that's smart, keeps things affordable, and make sure above all else that the system is reliable. That's why our plan is so different than the NDP.
So you started out when you were running for office, harshly criticizing the Trudeau government and pushing hard on the Sovereignty Act, but have since become more conciliatory with the federal government, reaching out to them and maybe trying to find common ground on energy issues such as the just transition. Why this change in tone, and has it worked?
I can agree with the federal government on a few things. I mean, it's helpful that they have sent in the military and other resources to assist with the wildfires. It's helpful that we signed a $24 billion healthcare deal so that it ensures no one will ever have to pay for a family doctor, no one will ever have to pay out of pocket for hospital services. It's helpful that they are also going to be supporting our First Nations as they go through the recovery that we see from the wildfires. And we've also got $10 a day daycare, in part because the federal government has partnered with us on that too. So there are some things that we have to and can work with our federal government on. But we have to draw a very bright line when it comes to energy development and electricity generation. Those are things granted to us under the Constitution. And the federal government's policies that they continue to publicly state would essentially shut down our production. We have to remember, I mean, they talk about an emissions cap of 42% on oil and natural gas by 2030. 2030. It's just not achievable. And if they were to pursue that at this rate without the technology being available, then it is a production cap. There's no way around it. And that's what we need to avoid. So I've been hoping by pushing that that these resources are Albertans. We have the constitutional jurisdiction, putting up the shield in saying that we are going to vigorously defend our constitutional jurisdiction. I feel like by having our own emissions plan to get to the target by 2050. I believe that if this ever came down to a court battle, we'd win, because we'd be defending our jurisdiction and we'd be demonstrating that we have a plan. So that's the intention that I've had all the way along, and we will work with the federal government where we can. And I can tell you there's lots of places we can work with the federal government. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We can work with them on rolling out small modular nuclear. We can work with them on developing geothermal, as well as we've created a structure for critical minerals like lithium. We can work with them on getting key components for batteries. We can continue working with them on the hydrogen economy, which is so exciting, especially in the industrial heartland. We can work with them as well on building pipelines so we can do export of LNG, because the more LNG we get out there in the world, it'll start displacing coal plants and more polluting fuels. And that should be the vision that the federal government can side with us on. And if we can do those things, I think that we can work collaboratively together. And so those are the things that we're continuing to work on. But there's some hard no's. Hard no to unachievable timeframes. Hard no to a net zero power grid by 2035. Hard no to an emissions cap by 2030. We simply can't do these things.
So the United States has no carbon tax and is starting to export as much LNG as fast as it can. Our global rival, China, is building more coal plants than ever and takes more manufacturing jobs all the time from the Western world, but it has no carbon tax. Canada has a carbon tax, one that will triple by 2030. You don't think the carbon tax is a good idea, but for those people who think global warming is a top priority, what do you propose for Alberta to do to help cut global emissions?
Well, I must say, we have to remember that in the last election, Rachel Notley did not campaign on a carbon tax, and she brought it in regardless. And then when we came in, we tried to get rid of it, and the courts won't let us get rid of it. So now we have Justin Trudeau imposing a carbon tax on us that continues to go up. I mean, we begged Rachel Notley to contact Jagmeet Singh, because remember, we've got an NDP Liberal coalition in Ottawa, and she should have influence. The NDP party in Alberta is the provincial wing of the federal party. She should have some influence to say, don't do this. We're in the middle of an affordability crisis. Don't make it worse by increasing the cost of everything when you increase gasoline and diesel, when you increase the cost on home heating. And she didn't do that. And in fact, we've got the federal government now that is looking at increasing it by 300%. So this is the reason why we fought so hard against the retail carbon tax. We know we can reduce industrial emissions. Absolutely. We've already had great success on that. But the retail carbon tax just punishes consumers and makes my life more affordable. And so that's why we have been so opposed to it. But if you think about the opportunity that we have to be able to get offset emissions by reducing emissions globally, that was always contemplated in the Paris Accord. There's a section of the Paris Accord that says if we reduce emissions somewhere else, then we can share the credit for it. And when you think about, for instance, the LNG project on the West Coast, my understanding is that for every billion cubic feet of natural gas that we export, it saves 15 megatons of emissions. And we're talking about 4 billion cubic feet of export, which would mean that we could reduce global emissions by 60 megatons. That's a substantial portion of what Alberta has each year in emissions. That would be an amazing offset for us to be able to get. And that's just one project, LNG Canada, if it finishes its 2 phases. So that's why I feel so bullish on the notion that we should be exporting more clean energy, more clean LNG. Let's make sure that the people of the world have access to clean, reliable energy. And then we continue to work on reducing emissions over a period of time as the technology becomes available and proven out. That would be a smart strategy. That's the reason why we think that exporting LNG is going to be an integral part of this answer. My
neighbor is cutting down his tree outside here, so I don't know if you're going to...
I can't hear it.
I'm going to hit the mute button when... Anyway, hopefully it'll deal with the issue. Okay, we're going to switch to some COVID issues. We heard much about the harms of COVID during the pandemic, but not so much from our leaders or healthcare authorities about the harms of lockdown restrictions. Mm-hmm. What do you think the main harm of lockdown restrictions were?
Oh, on our kids. I just, my heart breaks thinking about all the stories that I hear of the mental health issues that we're hearing in schools, the social anxiety. You can see it manifested in kids self-medicating with drugs, getting addicted. We did a press conference yesterday, 2 young girls talking about being addicted as early as age 12 and 14. And when you get addicted, sometimes it can lead to death. And those are, to me, the things that we still are going to have to recover from, is how do we make sure that we support our young people so that they can deal with what they went through over these past 3 years. We have to make sure that they feel supported and make sure that we're addressing it now. It's part of the reason why we've invested so much in mental health. This is the big difference with the UCP government, is that I think there's been a lot of lip service paid to mental health over the last number of decades, but we're the first government to actually embed mental health as an essential part of our healthcare system, and addiction as an essential part of our publicly funded healthcare system. Rachel Notley used to charge people $40 per day for an addiction treatment bed. We eliminated that. We massively increased the amount of treatment spaces available. We're building out recovery communities, and we're going to make sure that every single person who has an addiction has access to a recovery option, a treatment bed, so we can get them on the path to recovery. And we're also investing in our young people at the early stages with mental health support. We announced that we are supporting CASA, which is one of the groups in Sherwood Park, to expand their operations. They do off-site mental health support for young people, as well as in-school support, and also the summit in Calgary. We know that if we can address these anxiety issues and these isolation issues early, then we can break the cycle so that it doesn't turn into an addiction crisis, doesn't turn into a homeless crisis, and more families are not suffering with the loss of a loved one. Those are the things that I think are absolutely essential. And I think we also see it playing out in our streets in Calgary and Edmonton. The fact that we have got so much public disorder and so many sad stories of addiction taking over people's lives. I think people are very surprised at what happened when they started going back downtown post-COVID. And we've already got a plan to address it. And we're 4 years in to our mental health build out. We're 4 years into an 8-year plan, which is part of the reason we need another Band-Aid. But we've also then shored that up with public safety, because people can't be walking down the street worried that they're going to get randomly assaulted or, heaven forbid, stabbed, or have to walk past an open doorway and smell crystal meth smoke. There's certain things that have to be unacceptable, and we're going to deal with it on both sides of things.
The NDP constantly brings up your record during the COVID pandemic, in particular, your grave concerns about vaccine mandates, your concerns about unvaccinated people losing their jobs, your doubts about heavy-handed lockdown measures. But given the attitude that many or most Albertans now have about lockdown restrictions and mandates, do you think the NDP's focus helps or hurts your chances in this election?
You know what I know? I know that people want COVID to be behind us. You have to remember what happened when I got elected. When I got elected, I was told that the healthcare system was on the brink of collapse. And the NDP solution was that they wanted us to go back to mask mandates and to shut down schools. And I just said, no way, we are absolutely not going back to that. If the problem is Alberta Health Services, then we've got to fix Alberta Health Services. And that's why I launched on an immediate plan to talk to nurses, doctors, and other health professionals and said, what do we need to do to fix this system, to get it working so that it can manage the surge every time we have respiratory virus season? And we took their advice. We implemented their ideas, and it is already working. Hospital wait times are down. We've got ambulance wait times are down. Red alerts on ambulance are a thing of the past. You now have an ambulance available when you call. We've started reducing the surgical backlog by 3,000 surgeries a month. We will have that backlog completely cleared by this time next year. And we'll be the first province in the country to do that. So those are the kind of things that I want to mandate to continue on. Is I think people want to know the health system is going to be there for them when they need it. COVID didn't break our healthcare system. It just revealed our healthcare system was broken. And that's why someone had to have the courage to go in there, start making the changes so that we could get it back on track, so people could have confidence every time we enter respiratory virus season. I can tell you, I have confidence now. I think that we've made so much great progress with the help of our frontline. And that's what I think people should be looking forward to, is the fact that we can finally put COVID in the rearview mirror and we can come back together as friends and families and communities and stop all of the division that happened during that terrible dark time.
The NDP has made it abundantly clear in the past that it supported providing the safe supply of drugs to hardcore addicts, though Notley now denies this. And she does clarify that the NDP does not support safe supply anymore. Why are you against safe supply?
Just look at what's happening in British Columbia. Look what's happening in Eastside Vancouver. Look what's happening all down the West Coast. This was the approach was harm reduction. And, I think it sounds plausible. It sounds like it's going to work. And instead it hasn't. By flooding the streets with what they call a safe supply of drugs, you can see what has happened in British Columbia. Adam Zivo just did a major piece for the National Post where he looked at what's happened. So there's a drug called hydromorphone, which they're giving out. It's 5 times more powerful than heroin, but it's still not what true drug addicts on the street want. They want fentanyl. So they're taking this cheap supply, free supply of hydromorphone. They're selling it for pennies. And then they're taking the money and going and buying fentanyl. It's actually ended up increasing the amount of illegal drugs in the street. And because it's driven the price of hydromorphone down so much, it's actually addicting more people, addicting more kids. And that's the reason why we can't do that. The approach that you have to take is one where you don't give up on people and you constantly have an option to say, go into treatment and have encouragement to go into treatment and have friends and family encouraging going into treatment. That's why we announced that we think that the step has to be what we already have for young people who are in the throes of addiction. Parents can go to court and ask for a treatment order. We think that needs to be broadened and applied so that more families would be able to save the lives of their loved ones. When we heard from the 2 young female addicts who spoke at our press conference, they both said when they were in the throes of addiction, they weren't thinking about the next step. They were thinking about their next fix. They're not in the right, they're not in a rational frame of mind to be able to take care of themselves And when we find people who are causing harm to themselves or harm to others, we step in. We don't just sit back and enable people to slowly kill themselves, whether it's 14 overdoses or it takes weeks or months or years to do it. There's only three pathways for somebody who's in the throes of addiction. One is institutional. One is going to jail. Another is dying, and the third is going into treatment. And we believe that treatment is the option. There's so many people in recovery, so many people who want to pay it forward. We've seen what happens in the opposite pathway. We have to do something different. And that's what we're doing in Alberta. It's called the Alberta model. People are coming from all over the world to see what we're doing here. And we need another mandate to continue it.
Rachel Notley has just now called the UCP's plan for vastly more free recovery treatment spaces for hardcore addicts an excellent plan. But are you certain this UCP plan is going to have positive results? As families of addicts will tell you, and they have told me, it's extremely difficult to get addicts to change.
You know what? I guess I look at it as that we don't give up on people. The group that we've hired at our first recovery community, who does addiction recovery, has had a 77 to 85% success rate. That's pretty darn good, and I think that's worth it. Even if the rates are a little bit lower, even if we can just save half of the people who go into recovery on the first time, let's try again. Let's do it a second time. And when we deal with things as a health issue, we don't just say, oh, well, we tried that treatment once and it didn't work, so let's just give up. Say, okay, well, we tried that, didn't work. Let's keep on trying. Let's try again. Let's get people to a point where they can be recovered. So I think it's worth trying, because I can tell you what the alternative is. When you look at what happened in Lethbridge, when they brought in a safe consumption site down there, is what they called it. They went from having a homeless population of 200 to 300 people to a homeless population of 900 people. It was causing all kinds of social disorder, crime, danger. We shut it down. Clearly wasn't working. They're back to having 200 or 300 people, and that's still too high. But it's a demonstration to me that these kinds of approaches actually increase the nature of the problem. They increase the nature of the problem. They increase addiction. They increase the number of people who try drugs and get addicted to drugs. And we simply can't allow that. I think that the failure of the other system is so clear that we've got to try something different. And I'm willing to give that a try.
All right. Both the NDP and the UCP promise to spend far more on healthcare. Both parties are focused on ever more money being put into the current system, yet at the same time, the health of Canadians is declining due to a crisis in our metabolic health, leading to higher rates of type 2 diabetes, cancer, dementia, and heart disease. I see no party talking a lot about preventative medicine, only about pushing billions more into a system that fails to adequately address it. What is the UCP's plan to address this crisis in our poor and worsening metabolic health?
Well, this is what the $2 billion of investment in primary care is all about. Is part of the extra pressure that we have on our healthcare system in our emergency rooms is that people don't have a family doctor. And so if you don't have a family doctor, or your doctor's office closes early or isn't open evenings and weekends, and something goes wrong, then you end up going to an emergency room. And so we know that the next thing that we have to do is to create a new approach for how people can get access to that family doctor. We're talking about a team practice. We just signed an agreement with the Alberta Medical Association to allow for more alternative payment models. And I think that what will happen in future is something a lot like there's a Crowfoot primary care network in Calgary that has been in operation for over 20 years. And it has a doctor, and it's got nurse practitioners, and it's got LPNs and dietitians and nutritionists and physiotherapists and mental health experts, so that the right kind of care is delivered by the right kind of professional. And you have that team practice so that you always have a first point of entry into the healthcare system. That's the approach we need to take. It's why we're investing $2 billion in being able to build that system out. And that's going to be the next major pillar of repairing the healthcare system and addressing exactly what you're talking about. If we can do prevention first, get people taking good care of their diet and exercise, making sure that they're have stress release and good sleep, and also able to address those things at the front end on mental health, I think that we can avoid a lot of pressure on the hospital system. We absolutely need to invest in both.
I just have to see if the mutes, that's why I'm looking down here, if the mute's on or off. Okay, Rachel Notley is a hugely popular and charismatic politician with a large and passionate following. If you're elected, how will you reach out to her followers, in a time of real grave division and partisan division in society, and govern for all Albertans?
I think I've already demonstrated that I do that. Part of what I did on talk radio is whenever there was an issue, I wanted to make sure that I heard from all sides. That's the type of leader I am. So if I identify a problem, then I will go consult broadly, and then I'll make the best decisions possible. You have to be willing to listen to a broad range of people to do that. I also demonstrated that when, even though there's a lot of things I disagree with Justin Trudeau about on energy policy, but when it came to healthcare, we share the same objective. We want to uphold the principles of the Canada Health Act to make sure that there's dollars there to support people so they don't have to pay for a family doctor, and so that they've got the surgical services that they need. And then when the wildfires hit, I knew as we were elevating the emergency status, I had my chief of staff reach out to Ms. Notley's chief of staff to make sure that she was in the loop and knew what was happening, and that she's getting daily briefings as well. Like, there's certain things that you have to put partisanship aside for, and I've just demonstrated that, I think, through my actions, that's exactly the type of leader I am.
The NDP has said that the new K-3 kindergarten to grade 3 curriculum initiated under Jason Kenney is garbage, and they would trash all of it. But the new reading and writing program developed by U of A professor George Giorgio has been proven in Alberta classroom to work wonders, turning non-reading children into readers, and won the Alberta Teachers Association Award for Excellence in Research in 2019. How should Alberta education proceed with the curriculum, particularly in math, reading, and the sensitive area of social studies?
Well, I can tell you, you're absolutely right, that the K-3 curriculum for math and language arts has already been proven to reduce learning loss. There was a lot of kids who had learning loss during this disruption of the past 3 years. And because we're now teaching phonics, which is important for a lot of kids, learning how to sound out words so that they can learn how to read properly, and sort of the traditional algorithms in math so that parents and grandparents can help their kids with their math homework again, because the new math was really complicated and hard to understand. We're seeing the results already. So I am absolutely confident that our education minister got that right for K-3, and we already saw that many schools were already piloting the 4 to 6 curriculum in math and language arts as well. We've got a little more work to do on social studies. I think that area was the most controversial. It shouldn't be. We should be able to have a curriculum where we're taught historical facts, where we bring in world religions, where we give a appropriate amount of deference to our Indigenous heritage and history. These things shouldn't be controversial to do. I think these are things we all need to come to an understanding of. And so we've made the decision that we'll consult a little bit further to make sure that we can identify the areas where teachers are concerned. But I feel really confident that we've made the right decision. We also have made the decision to roll out the K-6 science curriculum for good reason. My goodness, the science curriculum hadn't been updated, I think, since 1996. I mean, I don't know if you remember back to 1996, but that was when I first had exposure to dial-up internet, was in 1996 in a central computer in the Fraser Institute's library when I was an intern there. That is how much science has changed in just that one area in that period of time. Of course, we had to upgrade our science curriculum, and we also had to build in some curriculum so kids know where energy comes from, and that it comes, and what we do in Alberta, and where their food comes from, and why agriculture is so important. So I think that I embrace the curriculum. I know that we have work to do on social studies, but I think that if we roll it out thoughtfully, get the feedback from teachers, I think it's going to make sure that our kids are well set for the future.
Alrighty, well, I see that our time is up. I just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to me and through me to Journal readers and Albertans.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, David.
Bye-bye.